So today we're going to focus on and break down the key factors which will help to progress your surfing like the professionals, which not only will help you as you become more of an advanced surfer, but also it'll help to expedite this process so much along the way as well. Now, this is building off a video from a couple of weeks back on the Sunday Glide 105, where we were talking about the rule of thirds, where different parts of the board are being utilised for different reasons, whether this be completing certain manoeuvres, maintaining speed and balance, and a lot of other factors. Now, once we've established ourselves with a variety of manoeuvres and we can move seamlessly and transition between the thirds of the boards really well, then we are starting to move ourselves into the advanced levels of surfing. All of this was covered in the previous video of the Sunday Glide number 105, so check that out if you haven't already. But once we're at this stage, how do we move forward and progress from here? The key is being able to move from a development of manoeuvres to a development of positioning. To start off with this though, I wanted to share a little bit of an insight and story in my journey and how I found this to be the case. If you are enjoying what we're doing here on the channel, please feel free to subscribe, but let's get into it. So up until, I guess not too long ago, it was probably around 2-3 years ago, I was really happy with where my surfing was at. I was completing good hang tens, some good turns, and was looking at getting myself into that next level of surfing. So looking to do some WSL contests and all of that. And I was really thinking about how do I make that next step forwards? How do I progress through? And my approach for that time was just more. So how do I do harder turns? How do I do longer hang tens? And a lot of this, as we'll speak about throughout the video, was at the cost of some of the nicer elements of longboarding. So with my turns, no matter where I was on the wave, I was trying to push harder. With my hang tens, no matter where I was on the wave, I was trying to hold them for a little bit longer. I suppose it's not just about more or the harder you can do something or the longer that you can do something that matters in longboarding. It is how as well. And as a result of this, I feel like my surfing, it definitely wasn't the way to send me to that next level. Quite often, I find I was bogging my turns more often. I was just hanging 10 for the sake of hanging 10 or extending out my nose rides into fat sections rather than staying in the hook, which didn't necessarily translate to better surfing. I'm glad I went through it because it has taught me quite a lot, but I suppose the idea here is what's an objective way to make our surfing progress? How do we make sure that we are progressing and not just pushing harder, which isn't necessarily the answer, or very rarely is it the answer in the upper levels of longboarding. So I suppose today what I really wanted to do is give you some really objective ways to improve your surfing from here on out without having to go through these mistakes first as well. It is super important to make sure we are taking that less is more approach, and this is what I've found has been a really pivotal aspect of my surfing. And as soon as I really understood this, even hearing people like CJ Nelson speak about this more recently, it just further consolidates that this is such a good path forwards, and it's a way to objectively improve rather than just trying to push harder. Less is more is certainly the way forward, so let's get into that now. So let's talk about what we need to be doing to make sure we're approaching the waves more like the professionals. Again, this isn't about more like I was doing when I was a kid. It's more about doing less but using the wave more effectively. And this does make me think about that concept of economy of effort, where I guess we can feel like we're trying to push harder and do more, but it actually has the kind of adverse results on the wave where it doesn't look as good or it's not really what we need, versus actually utilizing the wave and the wave's energy. So we're actually putting in less effort, but having greater results. And so this is all about using the energy of the wave effectively and efficiently to reduce the requirement of having to force the boards into certain positions or do things that don't work or where it doesn't, or where the board doesn't really want to go. The best longboarders do have a fairly unique approach to the wave where everything is really powerful and dynamic, but from our perspective, everything does look really controlled and relaxed. And this is all because they're really utilizing the pocket of the wave effectively while seamlessly transitioning as they need to from the front third of the board through to the tail to integrate their turns into the wave, and then also using that midpoint for the balance and trim as well. So really, the pocket of the wave, which is the most steep part of the wave face right near where the wave is breaking or the white water, has all the speed and power that we need as a longboarder to make our turns really accelerated and fast and on rail, as well as provide that lift for us in the pocket, which presents those outstanding nose rides, which is, I don't know about you, that's what I'm after in my longboarding. And so it gives us all of this without us having to do anything but place our board in the correct position. And the best longboarders will use this as well as the rule of thirds on the board to make sure that they're seamlessly transitioning from maneuver to maneuver, rail to rail, from the nose to the tail, and doing this really fluently and making sure that there's no breaking points in between their surfing. To do this, we need the pocket and we need to utilize the thirds of the wave correctly. Where you see mistakes here often are where we break trim, and this will be because we are not in the right part of the board for the right part of the wave, and we might be pushing things a little bit too hard as well, which doesn't allow that effortless glide that the longboard can present through this. The key to outstanding surfing is maintaining our position in the pocket and smoothly maneuvering from maneuver to maneuver with seamless transitions all centered around the pocket of the wave. So now that we understand the concept of why the pocket is so important, I did want to make sure that I used this to, I guess, build the framework on how we build on top of the rule of thirds, as we spoke about in the Sunday Glide 105, but also how we're going to make sure that this is applicable for your surfing right now. So with regards to turns, if you're still someone who's working on getting a variety of turns, such as your pivot turns, carving turns, drop knees, all of that, definitely important to make sure that you're building up that repertoire. But if you're looking at just increasing how dynamic your turns are, I'd like you to think about your positioning. So something that I will advocate for, and I can't advocate for enough in this instance, is actually using film and footage. This is such a useful way to see how critical you are throughout the maneuvers that you're doing, and it's something that's helped my surfing a ton. And I know it's one of the most important and useful strategies I use for one-on-one coaching as well. So if you can get some film of yourself, that's absolutely fantastic, because you'll be able to see where you are with regards to how close you are to the pocket. And as time goes on and as you work on this, if you pull yourself closer to the pocket, there's a few things that will happen. Firstly, your turning is going to become more on rail. And this is because through a more critical section, you're actually able to expose that undersurface of the board more. And this will mean that it's just more of the railing gauge rather than the flat part of the board, which will release or reduce our friction immensely when we're doing turns. And this will help to accelerate your turns, make them look more dynamic, and just have more power and spray in general. So this is a massive difference that I think people overlook a little bit. So rather than having to push hard, if we can build or lead our way into our turn by making sure we're either through a good bottom turn or making sure that we're piercing down the face of the wave through the midpoint of the board, so we're accelerating as fast as possible, and just as we're accelerating and coming out onto the shoulder, even beforehand when the wave is still nice and critical, we can then cross step a couple of steps back really smoothly to then place our board on rail. And this is just going to have a really nice effect where we explode that wake out in front of us for the turn. There's a couple of examples that I'll try and show here, but it's a really, really good way to go about progressing your surfing. So this will require more balance and more stability, and it is a difficult thing to do. It's not just simply placing it in the critical part and then there you go. It's going to be pretty tricky to make sure you're controlling it, because you will have more speed and power. But in terms of the effort and how much you're actually having to push through that board, it's not a whole lot different. It's more about the positioning in the wave. So try and pull yourself so that your turns are happening as close to the white water as possible. After your turns, the way that I see turns being of effect for longboarding is to reposition ourselves in the pocket. And this doesn't mean that turns aren't good in and of themselves, but they are really functional to make sure we're putting ourselves back in the pocket. And my take on that is we can become more in the pocket so that we can get our critical nose rides. Again, that's just my view on it and how I like to set up my surfing, utilizing beautiful carving maneuvers in the pocket, make them as powerful as possible by positioning them close to the curl of the wave. But if we can make sure that our turns are centered around positioning ourselves for nose riding, I feel like everything flows together really, really nicely. So that means there's a couple of things that we need to think about with our turns if we're going to make them transition really smoothly. Because if we want to, again, move up to our more professional level of surfing, or think about how the professionals are doing it, they have seamless transition not only up down the third of the board, but also the third of the wave. So if they're getting to the bottom of their turn down the flats and they're stopping and they're breaking trim, obviously not ideal. So what you'll see a lot of the good people doing is engaging their turn up the top half, and then as they're accelerating down the face of the wave, about that halfway point, you'll actually see them transition their rail. So they'll come onto the inside rail to then exit their maneuver and make sure that they can bottom turn and accelerate after their turn as well, rather than kind of stopping in dead space from there. And then from there, what you'd like to be seeing is, again, using the rule of thirds, stepping into the middle of the board to accelerate out of the turn, and then depending on what's coming up, we can either hit the nose for a pocket nose ride, or we can come back to the tail to engage ourselves in the pocket so that we're not steering too far away from where all the action's happening. For the nose riding, the way that I really like to think about this is a good nose ride is where we create lift underneath the nose. There's great nose rides where this doesn't happen, of course, but if we're thinking about that sensational nose ride that is your go-to thought whenever you're thinking of the perfect hang 10, typically it means that the nose of the board is right under the lip or right in the pocket, and then they've got a bit of a gap between the wave face and where the board is. The reason that we need to be in the pocket for this to happen is because we need that steep curve or steep nature of the wave to disengage the nose from the wave, essentially, which looks awesome. It's kind of like we're levitating. I think it's the absolute gold standard for our nose riding. But for this, because of the critical nature of the wave that we need to be in the pocket. And this is why, what I was saying before, when I was younger and I was trying to extend my nose rides just out as long as possible for the sake of it, because good nose rides are long nose rides. It's not necessarily the case, and I would now am trying to make sure that everything is as critical as possible. So I like to use that framework of dancing around the pocket a lot. Everything I'm doing is trying to maneuver myself around the pocket. If I can stay 2, 3, 4 feet around the pocket and not venture out too much further than that, in the perfect scenario where there's great waves, then that's my absolute go-to. That's essentially the way I like to frame my surfing, and that's how it can help your nose riding as well. If you are feeling really confident with your hang 10s, how tight can you get them? How long can you maintain yourself in that pocket? And then how's your seamless transition from the nose to the tail to keep yourself around the pocket as well? Of course, there's different varieties of styles and the way that we approach the wave, and there's nothing wrong with that as well. This is more my take and how I feel like we can best progress with our longboarding. This is very, very established around people who, I guess, are at that level where they're starting to progress up to the higher stages of their surfing. But I think it's really exciting for people who are just starting out as well, to have this understanding and theory around dialing in the pocket, making sure that we're surfing in the pocket as much as possible, and why we don't want to be out on the shoulder, out on the flats. And it's something that you guys can try, even if you're just focusing on bottom turn to trim down the wave, and then trialing your first initial turns is a good way to think about it as well. So I hope that's useful. Again, this is something I would have loved to have explained to me 3 years ago, so I thought it would be a really, really good thing to explain on the channel today. Again, if you did find it useful and you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe or check out the links in the description below. But otherwise, we'll see you on the next one.